Right. For those of you who fancy the idea of crossing from Xinjiang into Kazakhstan by land, let me tell you exactly how I did it. Because frankly, it wasn't a simple jaunt. First, I booked a flight to Ening. There, I met up with Principal Nikolai, the patriarch of the Russian families in the city. Haven't seen him in 2 years. Plan had changed, as you'd expect. The next day, I went to the terminal and got on an international bus heading to Almaty. Now, Almaty is about 400 kilometers from Ening, but did we get there in good time? Of course not. The whole journey took an entire day thanks to endless checkpoints, customs, and get this, our bus breaking down in the middle of nowhere. So now we're all lugging our luggage, piling into a minivan, and somehow squeezing ourselves in. After all that drama, we finally roll into Almaty. And what happens? My suitcase is in tatters, not even joking. So there I am, dragging it all the way to the hostel, walking along the highway for nearly an hour, trying not to throw myself into traffic. By the time I finally checked into the hostel, I was so exhausted that I almost collapsed on the spot. But, as with all great journeys, it's the chaos that makes the story worth telling. Hello and welcome to the city of Almaty, the former capital of Kazakhstan. I'm currently filming this in late April. Almaty is green, is serene, and just absolutely gorgeous. Check it out, man. Oh, acceleration, acceleration. Shut. Oh, this is scary. By the way, if you walk around in Almaty, you will find a lot of these long, straight streets that look quite similar. So if you ever get lost here, don't have any data on your phone, and don't speak any Russian or Kazakh, just remember that the snow-capped mountains are always to the south. And if you can see the mountains in front of you, that means you're heading south. Okay, welcome. Hello viewers, I am at Infernal Park, the most popular and perhaps the happiest place in Almaty. It's hard to imagine just several kilometers away, there's a dry steppe. And at the heart of the park is the beautiful Ascension Cathedral, designed exactly 120 years ago in 1904 and built entirely of wood without any nails. There aren't so many surviving Tsarist era buildings in Almaty, and this cathedral behind me is one of them. In the summer of 1914, the Great War erupted in Europe. The British and Russians cut off their century-long squabble and joined forces against the Germany-led Central Powers. By the summer of 1916, the war had gone properly sideways. Desperate for more men at the front, Tsar Nicholas II revoked the conscription exemption that Central Asians had enjoyed since the conquest and expected to mobilize 250,000 men from Turkestan and another 230,000 from the steppe Krai. The announcement came right in the middle of harvest season, when every pair of hands mattered. On July 4, 1916, a massive uprising broke out in Kujan, and the unrest spread like wildfire across Turkestan. It took dozens of military companies and hundreds of Cossacks to put down the rebellion. In the end, around 123,000 Turkestanis were sent to the front lines. In the steppe, the uprising was on a much larger scale. Kazakhs began to gather in large numbers, ready to go to war with the Russians. The resistance was so fierce that the Russian Empire never re-established control over the steppe. The greatest violence came in Semilichi, where the steppe cry met Turkestan. Here, the opposition to mobilization coalesced with the long-standing frustrations over Russian settlement and land loss. Initially, the insurgents targeted government offices, but they soon turned on Russian settlements, burning houses, destroying farms, and killing settlers. In response, the military armed Russian settlers and sent frontline soldiers from the region back home. The soldier-settlers repaid the violence. They put whole villages to the sword, stole cattle, destroyed irrigation channels, and occupied the land. According to early Soviet figures, 20% of the people of Semlinchi, 50% of the horses, 39% of the cattle, 55% of the camels, and 58% of the sheep were lost. Irrigation channels, orchards, and farmland lay in ruins. However, Central Asia was in fact the least of the empire's concerns. On February 23, 1917, riots broke out on the streets of St. Petersburg and quickly got out of control. 7 days later, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated in favor of his brother, Michael. The following day, when Michael refused the throne, the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty ceased to exist. Soon after, a civil war engulfed the country and saw the rise of the most formidable revolutionaries of the 20th century, the Bolsheviks. To ensure the Russian Empire would never have a second chance, the Bolsheviks had Tsar Nicholas II, his queen, 4 daughters and son, imprisoned and slaughtered. Their bodies were soaked in acid and destroyed. In November 1917, Turkestanis established the Turkestan Autonomy. 1 month later, the Kazakhs established the Alash Autonomy. By the spring of 1918, demobilized soldiers and settlers had taken power in several towns across Central Asia in the name of the proletariat. At the same time, a number of local warlords, known as the Basmachi, emerged to rally the population, quickly gaining momentum throughout the region. In the north, the Cossacks established their own government in Oldenburg and cut the only direct road link between Russia proper and Turkestan. In Transcaspia, the Turkmens re-established control over the oasis. In Bukhara, the emir declared independence. The establishment of Soviet power in Central Asia was the second conquest of the region. Only this time, it was conquered with machine guns and aircraft. In February 1918, the Red Army crushed the Turkestan Autonomy and massacred 25,000 people in Kokand. In November 1919, Tashkent was captured. In 1920, Khiva, Bukhara, and the Alash Autonomy were all subdued. Finally, in 1921, the Red Army crushed the soldier settlers in Semlichi. When the Civil War was over in 1922, Russia lay in ruins. Central Asia saw great damage, and hundreds of thousands of people fled to Xinjiang, Afghanistan, or Iran, leaving 2/3 of Arab land abandoned. The bitter struggle for victory shaped the Bolshevik attitudes in significant ways, and the important takeaway for them was a robust disregard for public opinion. They believed if the nation did not know its own best interests, then it had to be led to its salvation by force. This vision allowed them to undertake projects that other regimes would never imagine. It also underwrote the appalling cruelty and violence of the Bolshevik era. As a new order was being established in Russia, the British were gradually losing their grip on South Asia. Years of war had depleted the resources, and the drain from India had only intensified. In addition to man and material, the poor of India, without their consent, contributed a £100 million gift to the British government. Everyone bore the burden of war. The Muslim League and the Congress realized that further concessions could only be gained through cooperation. Jinnah was a key figure in this process. A prominent member of both parties, he advocated for Hindu-Muslim unity. Thanks to his efforts, the League and the Congress sat down and signed the Lucknow Pact in December 1916, ushering a period of collaboration between the two. Months later, in 1918, World War I ended. Britain and its allies punished and partitioned the Ottoman Empire, an act that angered many Indian Muslims. Because you see, for Sunni Muslims, the Ottoman Empire was more than just a political entity. It was the caliphate, the continuation of the authority of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Raj happened to have the largest Sunni Muslim population in the world. As a result, Indian Muslims launched the Khilafat movement, protested the sanctions placed on the Ottoman Empire, and called for retaining the Ottoman Sultan as the protector of Muslim holy places. To win over Muslim support, many Congress leaders backed the movement, and one of them was Gandhi. Gandhi believed that the British rule had been established and survived in India only because of the cooperation of Indians. If Indians refused to cooperate, the British rule would collapse and self-rule would follow. Thus, he called for non-violent non-cooperation in resistance against the British. After Gandhi championed the Caliph's cause, he gained significant support from the Muslims, and his campaigns also became more and more popular. Meanwhile, north of the Raj, seeing the British mired in troubles, the Afghans declared war. The opportunity first arose in October 1915, when a German mission arrived in Kabul and sought to convince Emir Habibullah to side with them in World War I. Habibullah, of course, declined the offer but used the German expedition as leverage in his relations with Britain, hoping the British would reward his loyalty with independence after the war. On top of that, he also actively promoted pro-British elites, including the Musahiban brothers of his new wife. Nader Khan was promoted to commander-in-chief, Hashim Khan was appointed general in Herat, and Shah Wali Khan served as commander of Habibullah's bodyguard. However, Habibullah's loyalty did not bring Afghanistan its independence. Instead, the Raj simply repaid him with 10 million rupees in July 1918. The Afghans were furious, believing the British had tricked the emir. On February 20, 1919, during a hunting trip, Habibullah was killed. He was succeeded by his third son, Amanullah, an anti-British leader determined to secure full independence from Britain. On May 3, 1919, Afghan troops invaded the Raj. Within days, British forces pushed them back and pursued them across the border. However, once on the other side, British troops came under heavy bombardment and their supply lines were troubled. Even with support from the Royal Air Force, the British made little progress. Both sides reached a stalemate, and neither wished to continue. To end the Third Anglo-Afghan War, a treaty was signed on August 8, 1919. Afghanistan gained independence, and in return, the Afghan government reaffirmed that the Durand Line marked the border between the two countries. By 1920, Gandhi had single-handedly transformed the Congress into a disciplined, mass organization capable of executing his non-cooperation strategy. He then expanded non-violent resistance to include the boycott of British products and British institutions, aiming to cripple the Raj economically, politically, and administratively. Gandhi's strategy was a huge success, but it was still very new to people, and occasionally, clashes occurred. On February 4, 1922, in the village of Churichura, the police opened fire on demonstrators. In retaliation, angry crowds set fire to the police station, killing all 22 policemen. 8 days later, as a direct result of the incident, Gandhi halted the non-cooperation movement at the national level. He was later arrested, tried for sedition, and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. Gandhi's non-cooperation movement was an inspiration to many, including Martin Luther King Jr., Ho Chi Minh, Nehru, the 14th Dalai Lama, and the list goes on and on. But Jinnah was not among them. He condemned the movement as political anarchy. Jinnah believed the only rightful way to achieve self-rule and independence for India was through constitutional reforms, not mass agitation. Seeing Congress adopt Gandhi's strategy, Jinnah resigned from the party in 1920, a decision that would shape the future of India. On December 30th, 1922, the Soviet Union was established. Despite his poor health, Lenin was elected chairman of the new government. In the following year, his health declined further, and on January 21st, 1924, Lenin fell into a coma and died. The fate of that embattled country now rested with a 46-year-old Georgian comrade, Joseph Stalin. Since the new state was a federal union based on national territorial autonomy, the boundaries in Central Asia were to be redrawn. There were many discussions on how and where to draw the lines. The Uzbeks wanted to gather the entire sedentary population into Uzbekistan, and the Kazakhs wanted to gather the entire nomadic population into Kazakhstan. The Turkmens claimed the Turkmen Desert and oasis by the Caspian Sea. The Kyrgyz and Karakalpaks sought recognition as distinct peoples from the Kazakhs and the creation of their own autonomous regions. The large Persian-speaking Tajik population, however, remained largely aloof. By the end of 1924, the borders in Central Asia were settled. Kazakhstan became an autonomous republic, while Karakalpakistan and Kyrgyzstan became autonomous districts. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan became union republics. Finally, a Tajik autonomous republic was created within Uzbekistan. Since there had been no organized Tajik movement prior to 1924, the ancient Tajik cities of Bukhara and Samarkand were placed outside of Tajikistan. With many Tajiks now under pressure to conform to their newly ascribed Uzbek identity, they began to push back. Over the next decade, Tajikistan broke away from Uzbekistan and became a union republic. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan broke away from Russia and also became union republics. And Karakalpakistan became an autonomous republic and was transferred to Uzbekistan. And that's how we got the 5 stans in Central Asia. After redrawing the political boundaries, the Soviets launched 3 waves of devastating campaigns that reshaped Eurasia. The first wave was the ideological front, aimed at controlling cultural policy across the multi-ethnic USSR and making sure everyone was on the same page. By 1925, press freedom vanished. The state monopolized cultural production. Writers, musicians, and artists had to join official unions to have their work published. All languages in the Soviet Union adopted the Cyrillic script, and Russian became mandatory in non-Russian schools. History was rewritten. The term conquest was replaced with annexation. The story of the expansion of the Russian Empire downplayed military conquest in favor of a narrative of peaceful annexation. Then, in the autumn of 1926, the party had decided to put an end to veiling and female seclusion in Central Asia. Now, I'm sure most of my viewers are familiar with veiling in Muslim culture. But here's the thing. There's veiling, and then there's veiling. What we commonly see today is the hijab or the niqab, a scarf that covers the hair, neck, and ears while leaving the face or just the eyes visible. But then there's the burqa that even veils the eyes behind the mask screen, allowing the wearer to see. And finally, there's the paranja. The paranja is something else entirely. It looks like this. A full-body robe that covers a woman from head to toe with no openings whatsoever. This is what Central Asian women were required to wear in public for centuries. They didn't just walk in shadow, they lived in shadow. The campaign began on International Women's Day in 1927, with thousands of women burning their paranjas. But the plan quickly backfired. Unveiled women were branded prostitutes, accused of betraying religion and family honor. On May 10, 1928, Dursoni Sedazimova, one of Uzbekistan's first actresses and singers, was stabbed to death by her husband for dishonoring his family by performing without a veil. A year later, on July 1, 1929, another Uzbek actress and dancer, Nurhon Yurdoshieva, was stabbed to death by her brother for the same reason. Both girls were just 16 years old. The violence stopped only when the party ended the campaign in 1929. By then, thousands of women had been killed by their own families. Finally, there was a campaign to eradicate Islam from Central Asia. To the Bolsheviks, religion hindered human potential and threatened their rule. Starting in 1927, Islamic institutions were attacked, desecrated, and shut down in large numbers. Many Islamic leaders were arrested and persecuted. Others fell silent, and the rest fled to Xinjiang or Afghanistan. The destruction came to a stop only in 1941. By then, of Central Asia's 30,000 mosques, fewer than 1,000 remained. Over 96% had been destroyed. This was the greatest assault on Islam in Central Asia since the Mongol invasions 7 centuries earlier. In 1929, the second wave began. That year, Stalin announced a great break from Lenin's policies and launched the USSR into rapid industrialization. He vowed to first build a successful socialist state at home, then spread revolution globally, so that everyone could live in a classless society, free from oppression and exploitation. I mean, you've got to give the guy some credit for being that concerned. To Soviet policymakers, building socialism meant rapid industrialization. Rapid industrialization required a planned economy, and a planned economy was based on the integration of farmland. Because without agricultural surpluses, industrialization was an illusion. I mean, how could you expect workers to do a better job if you couldn't feed them better? But the problem was that the state didn't own much land. It had always been a struggle until Stalin found a solution that would end private ownership of land once and for all. And it had a dreadful name that would haunt hundreds of millions of people in the decades to come: collectivization. The plan was to put everyone's land and livestock into large collectives, which would allow the state to mechanize agriculture and bring more food to everyone. The thinking behind it was great, but let's be honest here, nobody wanted to give up everything they had for some experiment that had never been tried in human history. Many peasants saw collectivization as a return of serfdom and refused to hand over their land and livestock. Uprisings broke out everywhere, and the Red Army crushed them all. In the end, tens of thousands of Turkistanis fled to Afghanistan, Iran, or Xinjiang. Those who couldn't flee slaughtered their animals rather than surrender them. Once resistance among the sedentary population was put down, collectivization turned the 4 republics of Transoxiana into a vast cotton plantation. The Cotton Bowl would remain their symbol until the end of the Soviet era. Kazakhstan was tasked with supplying grain and meat. From 1929 to 1931, procurement target increased tenfold. In 1930, the Politburo ordered the seizure of nearly a quarter of Kazakh livestock. For the Kazakhs, it was catastrophic. Pasture lands were collectivized and plowed. Livestock was seized and handed over to collective farms, where workers had no idea how to care for them. By the party's own estimates, 9/10 of Kazakhstan's livestock died. Without animals, the land couldn't be plowed. Grain rotted in warehouses because there were no draft animals left to transport it. Nomads could neither move nor eat. In early 1930, Kazakhs rose up in revolt and were crushed by the Red Army. In 1931, famine and disease spread across Kazakhstan, and much like the barefooted flight caused by the Djungas 200 years earlier, the Kazakhs fled to the Volga Basin in the west, Siberia in the north, Uzbekistan in the south, and Xinjiang in the east. The Soviet border guards saw the refugees as defectors. They shot, killed, and raped thousands, but many still made it to China. In total, as many as 200,000 Kazakhs and an unknown number of Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and Russians crossed into Xinjiang, which is still home to nearly 2 million Kazakhs, 160,000 Kyrgyz, 12,000 Uzbeks, and about 5,000 Russians.
那是30几年、31年，苏联开始搞集体农庄。原来是，有钱的人自己家里有牛有羊这样的，说是，就把他们开始处理了。除此之外，反正就有一条。那个羊或者一只羊，有一头牛，都那么一点，就算是很穷的，一点点有， 都算为不行，就把他们，要么安排到西伯利亚哪儿，就把他们移到哪儿过去，实在不听话的就处理掉，就压力比较大。这种相当一部分啊，甚至也发生，因为老的那个模式取消了，新的还没真正的走成新的道路，发生挨饿，好多人都饿死了那一阵子。那时候相当多的人也跑到中国来了。刚开始在俄罗斯搞这是集体农庄，那时候我爷爷跑到哈萨克斯坦啊，就远一点跑了。正好我父亲就是在哈萨克斯坦出生的，在那里也待过，好像是5年嘛多少，然后在这里也开始了，干脆跑到中国来了。我爸爸3岁的时候就来到中国，我也就来了，就算是一代一过，我就在中国生长的。
The situation began to improve only in 1934 when Moscow lowered procurement quotas and delivered some food aid. By the time the catastrophe was over, 40% of the Kazakh population was lost. 1.5 million had died in Kazakhstan, and 1.1 had left it, many of them never to return. Those who survived found themselves living in a completely different part of the world without the possibility of practicing nomadism. In just 3 short years, collectivization wiped out a nomadic tradition that had endured in Eurasia for millennia. Yet, despite the immense cost of collectivization, Central Asia saw no benefit from industrialization. The decade's only major project, the Great Fergana Canal, was built entirely by manual labor. To many Central Asian comrades, this was blatant colonialism and imperialism, the very thing the Bolsheviks promised to oppose. Disillusioned, they began to question the party and Stalin. And they would regret it, because the third and final wave of campaigns was about to begin. This wave of campaigns would take not only their face, but also their lives, and it had an even more dreadful name, the Great Purge. By the mid-1930s, even Stalin could see that collectivization was a disaster. Everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. But since by definition there could be nothing wrong with the Almighty Party or the Almighty Stalin, anything that went wrong must be the work of wreckers, anti-revolutionaries, and enemies of people. Such enemies had to be found, punished, locked up in jails, or worse, sent to the gulags.
You see, the word Kara has always held a very special place among the Turkic peoples. In the vast Eurasian plain, there are many cities, lakes, mountains, rivers, deserts with Kara as a prefix in their names. There's Karabakh in Azerbaijan, Karamay in China, Karachi in Pakistan, well, that one's a little different, Karaderi in Turkey, Karakur in Kyrgyzstan, Karakum, etc. In the Turkic languages, the word Kara means black or dark. But in this context, it conveys positive attributes such as bravery, strength, and leadership, all the good stuff. And here I am in a Kazakhstani city that also has the word Kara in its name. But unlike the other Kara cities that are black or dark figuratively or positively, this city is famous for 2 things that are actually black and dark. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Karaganda, the coal mining center of Kazakhstan and the site of the infamous Karlik, the Karaganda Corrective Labor Camp, one of the largest and darkest Gulag labor camps in the Soviet Union. Coal was first discovered in this region as early as 1833, but it took nearly 100 years for Karagana to develop into a proper settlement in the late 1920s. Initially, Karagana didn't have much supplies. The coal production was low and the living conditions were poor. But things changed in February 1931 when the railroad came in and brought supplies and highly qualified personnel. But to make the best use of the coal mines, highly qualified personnel were not enough. What Karagana really needed was an ocean of cheap labor. And when there's demand, there will always be supply.
The same year the railroad reached Karagana in 1931, NKVD established the infamous Karluk labor camp, and the main office building is this one behind me. In the very beginning, the camp only consisted of people who were arrested from Russia proper. But during the Great Purge from 1936 to 1938, all kinds of unwanted people were sent here to work. By 1939, Karagana had a population about 100,000 people, and about half of which were prisoners. In 1941, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, all the ethnic Germans in the nation, many of them didn't speak a word of German, were deported here to work in the mines and labor camp. And at one point, up to 70% of this region's population were ethnic Germans. And many of them were interned here all the way until the closure of Karluk in 1959, simply for being ethnic Germans. After World War II, a lot of Japanese and German POWs were also sent here to work, and to house and feed all these prisoners. Karluk also absorbed neighboring settlements into itself and confiscated a lot of livestock of the locals. Devastated, they either fled to China, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, or stayed and became cheap labor for the coal mines. Karluk was closed in 1959, and over the course of 30 years, more than 1 million people served here, and many of them lost their lives.
And another 282 kilometers away is perhaps one of the saddest camps in the former Soviet Union, which is this one behind me, the Algeria, the Akmelitz camp of wives and traitors to the motherland, the 17th Special Female Camp Detachment of the Karluk labor camp. So on August 15, 1937, NKVD came up with its new order 486 to repress the wives and children of the traitors to the motherland. And the logic goes like this: if you're married to someone who betrayed the motherland, or more like disagreed with Joseph Stalin, then you and all your children are going to share that guilt and are considered socially dangerous and need to be locked up, work, and re-educate for at least 5 to 8 years. And the same months this order, NKVD 486, came into effect, this camp behind me was established, merely 30 kilometers away from the modern-day Astana. The first group of women prisoners with children aged between 1 to 3 arrived here on January 6, 1938. And in the next 2 months, the prisoners were arriving non-stop from all over the nation: Moscow, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and of course, Central Asia. Younger children were locked up with their moms, while the older ones were placed in orphanages. In the camp, due to the poor conditions and constant moral humiliation, thousands of children died, and they were buried by the edge of desert in Dolinka. The camp was open for about 16 years until the year Stalin died in 1953. In total, over 20,000 women spent some time here. About 8,000 women served a full sentence. And it was reported that 1,507 of the women were raped by the guards and gave birth in this camp. Be that Gulag, Karlag, or this special camp for the wives of the traitors to the motherland, it was an absolutely horrific period in human history and highlighted the dangers of unchecked government power. When a regime can imprison or exile anyone it deems a threat, it crushes dissent and eliminates basic freedoms. When the justice system doesn't uphold the rule of law and protect individual rights, it creates a climate of fear and just unending tragedies.
As the Great Purge came to an end in 1939, the Soviet Union was a very different place than it had been a decade earlier. Its economy had been transformed, mutual trust had collapsed, society had been turned upside down, and 2 generations of intellectuals and party members were lost. Millions of people were displaced, killed, or starved. Time was running out, and the USSR, the first socialist country on Earth, was on the verge of total collapse. After gaining independence, Amanullah carried out his reforms and drafted Afghanistan's first constitution in 1923. Government officials were to be appointed based on merit, and a state council was established to exercise legislative functions. Amanullah also ended the Emirate of Afghanistan, adopted the title of king, and founded the Kingdom of Afghanistan. He had a striking modern attitude toward gender issues and practiced what he preached. Instead of marrying 4 wives, as permitted under Islamic law, the king married only 1 woman his entire life, Queen Soraya, the daughter of his mentor Mahmud Tarz. In late 1927, the couple went on a European tour, demonstrating to the world their resolve to modernize Afghanistan. They set out from Karachi and met King Fuad in Egypt. In January 1928, they arrived in Italy and met King Victor Emmanuel III, Prime Minister Benito Mussolini, and Pope Pius XI. They then went to France and met President Noumarki. In February, they arrived in Belgium and met King Albert I and Queen Elizabeth. On February 22nd, the Germanophile king arrived in Berlin and met President Paul von Hindenburg. They then crossed the English Channel and visited their former overlord, Great Britain, where King George V and Queen Mary served them a lavish party. In April, they departed England and traveled to Poland, where Amanullah met President Ignacy Mościcki. After a brief layover at the Soviet border, Amanullah went to Turkey and met his first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, in May 1928. The tour was a huge success and demonstrated Amanullah's determination to open up Afghanistan. However, while he was away, rumors distorted his achievements in Europe. People derided Queen Soraya's presence at his side and claimed the king had gone mad after eating pork during his travels. By the time Amanullah returned, the country was on the brink of a civil war. In December 1928, a Tajik warlord, Kalakani, began attacking Kabul. On January 14, 1929, Amanullah abdicated and fled to the Raj. 9 months later, the Musahiban brothers overthrew Kalakani, took power and ended the civil war. Nader Shah became king, Hashim Khan was appointed prime minister, Shah Wali Khan became minister of war, and Aziz Khan was named Afghan ambassador to Germany. Once in power, Nader made peace with his tribal leaders. The social-cultural modernization that Amanullah had pursued was abandoned in favor of a much more cautious approach to public policy. In 1931, a new constitution was drafted, and a new national army was established. But Nader's rule was not going to last very long either. Anti-British Afghans, angered by the increasing British influence, had Nader's brother Aziz Khan killed in Berlin on June 6, 1933. 5 months later, on November 8th, while Nader was attending a high school graduation ceremony, a 17-year-old student shot him dead. After Nader's death, his 19-year-old son Zahir succeeded him and ruled for nearly 40 years until 1973. His installation was a power-sharing consensus among Nader's remaining brothers. Hashim Khan remained prime minister and brought his nephew Daoud, son of Aziz Khan, into the center of power. Shah Mahmud Khan became Minister of War, while Shah Wali Khan served as ambassador to Paris. Until his resignation in 1946, Hashim Khan was the de facto ruler of Afghanistan. During his tenure, Afghanistan's foreign relations began to expand. In September 1934, it joined the League of Nations. Relations with Germany were pursued with vigor, not only because Germany was seen as a counterbalance to British and Soviet power, but also because Afghan nationalists saw themselves as Aryans, a group that Nazi racial ideology claimed was superior. Neighboring Iranians were also approached by the Germans and embraced similar ideas. In 1935, the Shah of Iran officially requested that the country no longer be called Persia, but instead use its Asian name, Iran, meaning Aryan. Meanwhile, in India, the violence between Hindus and Muslims resurfaced. The Khilafat movement had collapsed in 1924, ending the brief unity between the two communities. In the latter half of the 1920s, caste slaughter riots broke out in villages and cities from the Afghan border to the Burmese border. Competition for jobs and resources intensified. In East Bengal, Hindu extremists even called for the reconversion of Muslims to Hinduism. By then, Jinnah had been confirmed as the League's permanent president, but found the organization shrinking and fragmented. In contrast, thanks to Gandhi, the Congress was expanding and gaining popularity. Once out of jail, Gandhi returned to politics and designated Nehru as his heir, who was elected Congress president in 1929. On January 26, 1930, Gandhi launched his most successful non-violent, non-cooperation movement, the Salt March. Its goal was to end British monopoly on salt. From March 12 to April 6, in 25 days, Gandhi marched 388 kilometers from Ahmedabad to Dandi to make salt himself. Along the way, he spoke to locals, spread his ideas, and was joined by thousands. The Salt March gained global attention and put a lot of pressure on the British. Meanwhile, in London, the Conservatives lost the election and the Labour Party came to power. The new leadership wanted to discuss the future of India and invited Indian leaders from all backgrounds to London: Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, and the depressed classes, the untouchables.
The view of His Majesty's government is that responsibility for the government of India should be placed upon legislatures, central and provincial, with such provisions as may be necessary to guarantee during a period of transition the observance of certain obligations and to meet other special circumstances, and also with such guarantees as are required by minorities to protect their political liberties and rights.
In total, the British held 3 roundtable conferences. Jinnah attended the first 2, but not the last, while Gandhi only attended the second. The conferences featured many important speeches, including one by Dr. Ambedkar, representing the depressed classes. The depressed classes form a group by themselves which is distinct and separate from the Mohammedans. And although they are included among the Hindus, they are in no sense form an integral part of that community. The position assigned to the depressed classes is totally different. It is one which is midway between that of the serf and the slave. The ties that bonds the depressed classes to the British has been of a unique character. The depressed classes welcomed the British as their deliverers from age-long tyranny and oppression by the Orthodox Hindus. I encourage everyone to take a look at the whole speech and reflect on the complexities of the subcontinent. There are just so many layers to consider. If you're born into the lowest caste, which constitutes about 20% of the Indian population, your children and your children's children will remain there. systematically oppressed, possibly until the end of time. And there's absolutely not a thing you can do about it as long as you remain Hindu. That's actually part of the reason Islam and later Sikhism gained so many followers in India in so little time. So during the second roundtable conference, the British proposed separate electorates for the depressed classes, and Gandhi strongly opposed it, viewing it as a British attempt to divide the Hindus. In protest, he began a fast unto death and gained so much support that the British eventually gave in. Gandhi's refusal to challenge the caste system not only broke the hearts of many untouchables, leading to waves of conversion to Buddhism, but also left a negative impression on many European leaders. Winston Churchill, for instance, disliked Gandhi so much that he called him a Brahmin dictator and a Hindu Mussolini. Just before the third roundtable conference opened, a pamphlet titled Now or Never was circulated among the delegates. It had been published by a Cambridge student named Rahmat Ali, and it read, "At this solemn hour in the history of India, when British and Indian statesmen are laying the foundations of a federal constitution for that land, we address this appeal to you, in the name of our common heritage, on behalf of our 30 million Muslim brethren who live in Pakistan, by which we mean the 5 northern units of India, viz. Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, Afghan Province, Kashmir, Sind, and Baluchistan, for your sympathy and support in our grim and faithful struggle against political crucifixion and complete annihilation." In Urdu and Persian, the name Pakistan combines Pak, pure, and Stan, land, meaning pure land. Later, an I was added to improve pronunciation, and the name gained popularity. That's how Pakistan got its name. While in the end none of the conferences led to a settlement, Jinnah had lost hope that the Congress would ever be sensitive to minority concerns. It was like, if you Hindus couldn't even guarantee the rights of your own minorities, the depressed classes, how could we Muslims possibly expect you to protect ours? Decades of failed negotiations convinced more and more Muslim leaders that a separate Muslim state was necessary in an otherwise Hindu-majority South Asia. By the late 1930s, it was becoming clear to everyone that the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Raj was only a matter of time. Their administrations were eroding and their people had lost faith. But then, at the 11th hour, history cracked open a window for the two crumbling nations. Through this narrow opening, one was miraculously saved, while the other was shattered beyond repair. And with that, the Second World War began. If you travel to Russia or any former Soviet Union countries, it is impossible to miss the many war memorials. Even in Northeast China and Mongolia, you can find war memorials built by the Soviets. This is because war can either shatter or forge a nation. And just as World War I shattered the Russian Empire, World War II forged the Soviet Union. Stalin was not ready for war. After a decade-long forced industrialization, the country was in no shape to fight. To avoid conflict with Germany, he signed a non-aggression pact with the Nazis in 1939. Hitler, however, made the decision for him. 2 years into the war, on June 22, 1941, he broke the pact and invaded the Soviet Union. In the first 6 months, Nazi forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, decimating the army and occupying key industrial regions. The Soviet regime faced a major crisis of morale. After years of trauma, defeatism spread among people. Nevertheless, Stalin launched a desperate, all-out effort that mobilized the country's resources and put up a determined fight. As 40% of the Soviet Union's arable land had been occupied by the Germans in the first weeks of the war, the Soviet state finally gave up its control over food distribution, assigning it to localities and organizations. The war on religion came to a stop. Churches and mosques were reopened and threw their energies into the war effort. The Orthodox churches issued proclamations urging believers to defend the homeland, while Islamic institutions called the war a general and secret jihad. Over the course of the war, 3.4 million Central Asians were drafted into the army. With so many men gone to the front, women were finally unveiled, brought into the labor force, and stepped out of the darkness. By the time the war ended, an estimated 314,000 Central Asians had lost their lives. The war produced many remarkable figures, such as the Penfield Division. If you go to Almaty one day, you cannot miss their monument. Recruited from southern Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, the division fought in the Battle of Moscow in late 1941, where 28 soldiers died trying to stop the German troops. Their story passed into legend and was celebrated across the Soviet Union. Aside from providing millions of manpower to the front, Central Asia also offered safety to the refugees from Russia proper. From 1941 to 1942, Kazakhstan received about 600,000 evacuees. Uzbekistan received over 1 million people, including 200,000 orphans. More than 300 factories were dismembered, put on trains, and moved to Kazakhstan, and over 280 to Uzbekistan. Until the war, industrialization in Central Asia had been minimal. Now, heavy industry appeared overnight. After the war ended, the millions of soldiers returned home transformed. They had seen the world far beyond their villages, formed friendships with comrades from across the Soviet Union, learned Russian, and some even married Russian wives. For the remainder of the Soviet era, the Great Patriotic War served as the foundation of the Soviet patriotism that united the vast nation. War memorials were built in every city, and activities commemorating that history continue to this day. It turned out what truly brought people together and saved the Soviet Union was not Bolshevik propaganda, not Marxist vision, not Lenin's ideals, not Stalin's plans, but a bloody war that claimed 27 million Soviet lives. Afghanistan responded to the outbreak of the Second World War with caution. It opted for a position of strict neutrality and expelled the nationals of the Axis powers. This allowed Afghanistan to avoid the occupation by British and Soviet forces that its neighbor Iran experienced since 1941. After the war, Afghanistan was admitted to the United Nations on November 9, 1946, and established relations with the United States. While the world was trapped in conflict, Afghanistan enjoyed a period of relative peace. The British Raj, however, enjoyed no peace and was engulfed in a series of tsunamis. On September 3, 1939, the United Kingdom declared war on the Axis powers. The next day, without consulting the Indians, the Raj announced that India had entered the war alongside Britain, suspending all negotiations on self-government. The Congress boycotted the war, refusing to participate. Gandhi argued that India could not support a war for democratic freedom while being denied that freedom itself. Jinnah and the Muslim League, however, were more willing to cooperate with the British. As the war continued, Jinnah grew increasingly sectarian. He looked at Europe and the Soviet Union and realized that minorities everywhere were being exterminated. He was convinced that if India were going to be united, with Hindus and Muslims living together, Muslims would be constantly at the mercy of the Hindu majority. To safeguard Muslim interests, he believed the best solution was a separate Muslim majority state. On March 23, 1940, the League passed the Pakistan Resolution, officially calling for a Muslim majority state with complete autonomy. Meanwhile, Gandhi's demand for independence also intensified. In 1942, he called for the British to quit India in a speech, proclaiming another massive non-violent movement. Hours after the speech, Gandhi and much of the Congress leadership were arrested. While Congress leaders languished in jail, the Muslim League gained organizational strength and occupied the center of the political stage. When Gandhi was released 2 years later in May 1944, the political scene in India was altered. Jinnah's campaign for Pakistan had become a major talking point. The two leaders held several discussions, but none resulted in an agreement. One demanded that the British quit India, while the other demanded that the British divide and quit India. Neither side was willing to compromise. As World War II came to an end, Britain was tired, bankrupt, and had lost its resolve. It was desperate to rebuild itself, and holding on to India was no longer pragmatic. So the deal was just get out of there with as little collateral damage as possible and make it look as good as possible. In June 1946, the UK government presented its draft plan for independent India. India would remain united, with a central government, but the real power would lie with each individual province. Jinnah accepted the plan. From his understanding, the plan would give him the Muslim-majority provinces of Bengal, Punjab, and the northwest frontier provinces, and he believed that was essentially Pakistan in a nutshell. Nehru also accepted the plan, but he had a very different understanding and said he would not feel bound by either the words or the spirit of the plan. Basically, Nehru was like, we're signing this for now to get independence, but once the British are gone, we will do as we please. When Jinnah heard about this, he was livid and withdrew his acceptance. It reaffirmed all his fears about Congress and made him realize that there had to be a demonstration of mass public view for his idea. He then held a press conference and announced that August 16, 1946 would be Direct Action Day. Jinnah warned Congress, "We do not want war. If you want war, we accept your offer unhesitatingly. We will either have a divided India or a destroyed India." Then, Direct Action Day arrived. It was supposed to be an all-day strike by Muslims all over India to show the power of the demand for Pakistan. But the problem was that Jinnah didn't define what direct action meant, and for different people it meant very different things. The phrase itself had a triggering effect, and it sure did trigger a lot of people in Calcutta, where Hindus and Muslims had been neighbors for centuries. At first, Muslims were mainly gathering in peaceful demonstrations, but very quickly groups of Hindus and Muslims ran into each other. The tensions were bubbling, and when the sun set, all hell broke loose.
First victim I saw was a poor porter, Hindu, and he had just come into this side street. There, a Muslim in a lungi broke away from a procession with a iron rod and hit him on the head.
In our area where we used to live, any stranger coming in was derobed, and they wanted to find out whether he was a Hindu or not. If he was not a Hindu, he was murdered on the spot.
5 days after the Direct Action Day, there were already 15,000 people injured, and an estimated 10,000 were killed. Many people fled the city and spread tales of what had happened. These tales spread like wildfire across northern India, and more bloodbaths followed. The British government, the League, and the Congress were all shocked. India was getting out of control, and they didn't know how to stop the madness.
I welcome this opportunity for 3 reasons. First of all, because I must confess that it was my idea that the council chamber should be moved here. It was the first proposal I'd ever had the nerve to put up at a council meeting.
On March 24, 1947, Queen Victoria's great-grandson Mountbatten took office as the 20th and last Viceroy of India, and his appointment came with a looming deadline. The British government wanted to be out of India no later than June 1948. On the same day that Mountbatten was officially sworn in, he met Nehru. The two had known each other before and quickly found a friendship.
Nehru was a great statesman. He had a brilliant mind. He was quite amazingly quick to grasp a point and very sensitive to situations. I had an early indication of his acuteness. Not long after I arrived, he said to me, "Have you by some miracle been given plenipotentiary powers?" Why do you ask? You behave quite differently from any other viceroy. One has a feeling that what you say goes. Well, what if I have? In that case, you will succeed, said Nehru.
Things went differently for Jinnah. It wasn't until almost 2 weeks after meeting Nehru that Mountbatten first met with Jinnah, and the two did not get along.
He argued there must be partition. Otherwise, as a minority community, the Muslims would be swamped in Hindu India. Right, I said. Then by the same argument, the 2 provinces you want in Pakistan with large non-Muslim minorities will also have to be partitioned. Oh no, you can't do that. Punjabi unity and Bengali unity are much more important than Hindu-Muslim differences. In that case, I said, surely Indian unity is much more important than Hindu-Muslim differences. Oh no, said Jinnah, we must have Pakistan. And so it went on, a circular argument, round and round the mulberry bush. I never met anybody who could say no so persistently and so effectively.
In May, Mountbatten came up with a plan for Indian independence. It was to balkanize India and transfer power to a dozen provincial governments instead of a strong central government. Hazen went to Simla to rest, took Nehru with him, and shared the top secret plan.
Since Nehru was here with me, I would show it to him straight away in confidence. Of course, I could never have thought of such a thing if we hadn't already been such good friends. Nehru turned the new draft down flat. He said it would lead to the balkanization of India, and he would have nothing to do with it, and he doubted if any party would.
The Viceroy Secretary, V.P. Menon, came up with a new plan to transfer power to two countries, India and Pakistan, and Nehru approved it. On June 2, 1947, Mountbatten gathered all the Indian leaders and presented them with the new plan for independence, giving them only until midnight to raise any concerns. Jinnah was unaware that Nehru had already approved it. He looked at the plan and immediately found issues. The plan proposed by Mountbatten not only partitioned both Bengal and Punjab, but also left no corridor connecting East and West Pakistan. Nevertheless, Jinnah accepted the plan. There is no doubt that the Viceroy bullied Jinnah into accepting, but it would have been very difficult for him to turn down even this truncated Pakistan. The next day, on June 3rd, Mountbatten made the formal announcement by radio.
There can be no question of coercing any large areas in which one community has a majority to live against their will under a government in which another community has a majority. And the only alternative to coercion is partition.
Mountbatten then revealed an even more disturbing aspect of his plans. Instead of June 1948, independence would be declared 73 days later, on August 15, 1947. 73 days, 10 weeks to create two new countries with two different identities. This sent a shockwave across India. Everyone was asking seriously, where is this line? Who's going to go where? It was a total mass of confusion, doubt, and fear. And when folks get scared like that, things can get pretty violent pretty fast. 19 days after Mountbatten's broadcast, Lahore, the capital of Punjab, was the first to erupt into violence. Suddenly, neighbors were turning on each other, fighting over the future of that city. Every day, there were new buildings burned down and new bodies on the streets. Punjab descended into a living hell. 6 weeks before partition, the British government finally believed it was time to settle the border question and sent a barrister who had no knowledge of India whatsoever to do the job. The poor guy's name was Cyril Radcliffe. He was asked to create a new country in two parts, 1,000 miles apart, within 6 weeks. 3 days before partition, Radcliffe finally completed the boundary. Mountbatten reviewed the map and summoned Radcliffe. When he returned, the map had been changed. Two Muslim majority sub-districts, which had been allocated to Pakistan, were given to India. After the new border was handed over, the Viceroy kept it a secret for 4 days and didn't announce it until 2 days after Independence Day. While India was literally burning, Mountbatten was more concerned about having less blood on his hands. On August 14th, Pakistan became independent. Hours later, India became independent. The joy of independence lasted only 2 days though, because on August 17th, Mountbatten announced the boundary lines, unleashing one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. As millions of Hindus and Sikhs moved toward India, millions of Muslims moved in the opposite direction. An organized campaign of ethnic cleansing began. It is now estimated that during the partition, between 12 and 18 million people were displaced, and between 1 and 3 million lost their lives. 5 months after the partition, on the afternoon of January 30, 1948, as Gandhi was on his way to address a prayer meeting, A Hindu nationalist fired 3 bullets into his chest. The 78-year-old leader had no chance of survival and died shortly after. 7 months later, on September 11th, the 73-year-old Jinnah came down with pneumonia. Doctors couldn't revive him. One said to him, "God willing, you're going to live." And Jinnah just said, "No, I'm not." He died that evening at 10:20 p.m. at his home in Karachi. With their deaths, the Seven Steins entered a new age and found themselves in a new war, the Cold War.